In May 1971, when Herb was 23, he moved to San Francisco, away from the watchful eye of his family. Donald Lund, a psychiatrist who examined Mullin and later wrote the Die Song, believes that this was a critical period in Herb's psychosis. He lived in decrepit apartments among alcoholics and drug addicts, sinking further into his bizarre belief systems. Mullin walked into the YMCA with a Bible, and soon became a fierce boxer. In his first Golden Gloves tournament, he wouldn't stop assailing his opponent. Trainers had to pull him away. He punched a speed bag until his knuckles were covered with blood. If left unattended, he stood still and loudly chattered with himself. After losing his first match in the ring, Mullin left the boxing ring with the plans to become a priest. He dabbled in art. After punching the floors of his apartment, and getting into screaming matches with God, the apartment manager evicted him. "He left the human race that day," said an artist friend. In September 1972, Mullin moved in with his parents, determined to make something of himself. But he stopped taking his medication, and he festered in his anger at his father while living under his roof. And to top it all off, a major earthquake was predicted to devastate California in the next few months. Although the eccentric, self-taught scientist who grimly announced the trembler wasn't taken seriously by most, there was one person who took it as a call to action. Where most people saw a crackpot, Mullin saw a prophet. Make no mistake, Mr. Mullin hears voices, and the voices told him to kill. The acts were not acts of murder but acts of sacrifice. James Jackson, Mullin's attorney. On a wet October morning, Friday the 13th, Herbert Mullin found a baseball bat in the garage, and went for a drive. Earlier in the week, he claimed that his father had been sending him telepathic messages to kill. "If I didn't kill, it would bring shame to the family by showing cowardice," he said. It was kill or get out. As he drove along the windy road that followed the river through the redwoods, Mullin spotted a transient walking alone. After he passed him, he pulled over, popped the hood of his '58 Chevy station wagon, and pretended to have car trouble. When the homeless man, Lawrence White, stopped to take a look at the engine, Mullin bashed his head with the baseball bat. He then pushed the lifeless body of the would-be Good Samaritan down the side of the road, and drove off. Then, Mullin said, the ball was rolling. White was an easy target, and wasn't missed. Between stints in the drunk tank, the 55-year-old transient slept under bridges and in the woods where he wouldn't be hassled. He was a blank, barely mentioned in the papers when his battered body was discovered days later. No family came to his funeral, and no one rushed out to find his killer. Mullin later claimed that White looked like Jonah from the Bible, and sent him telepathic messages. "Hey, man, pick me up and throw me over the boat. Kill me so that others will be saved." The female hitchhiker. As a means of understanding serial killers, renowned FBI investigator John Douglas used this figure of speech: "If you want to understand the artist, look at his work." Mullin took the notion a step further: if you want to understand the artist, recreate his work. After reading Irving Stone's biography on Michelangelo, The Agony and the Ecstasy, Mullin decided that, as a serious artist, he should do what the famous Renaissance sculptor did: dissect a body. Michelangelo spent hours and hours secretly dissecting bodies so he could find out about the form of the human body for his painting and sculpture and stuff. That's why his works are so much better than anyone else's. It gave him insight others didn't have. His mom had given him the Michelangelo book, hoping that Herb would be inspired to use art as an emotional outlet. What it inspired was another murder, and the most grisly one in Mullin's career. In a rare twist of maternal wrath, Herb blamed his mother for this killing. believing that she gave him the book as a hint to dissect someone. I think she was trying to tell me what to do, so I could have this insight too. Mary Guilfoyle was running late for a job interview, so she did what many young women in Santa Cruz did. Despite the warnings, she hitched a ride. Although she was fortunate that Edmund Kemper wasn't making the rounds that day on this main thoroughfare near Cabrillo Community College, just a few blocks from his duplex home, she underestimated the driver of the '58 Chevy station wagon that pulled up alongside her. No doubt that the 24-year-old Guilfoyle had heard the cautionary tales about women, last seen hitchhiking, who were missing, or raped, or found decapitated. But the slight, doe-eyed young man behind the wheel didn't look like a lecherous brute. He was handsome, soft-spoken, and not much bigger than her. With Guilfoyle relaxed in the car, Mullin pulled off onto a quiet side street, yanked out a hunting knife, and stabbed her in the chest and back. Guilfoyle died instantly. But she would not be found for months. After dragging her body into a deserted area off the hillside road, Mullin opened Guilfoyle up and unraveled her organs. Mullin thought he could see inside people's heads, but now he wanted to see inside their bodies. Whatever it was he saw, it was enough to dissuade him from recommitting this grotesque and morbid autopsy again. If voices were commanding him to kill, he was overextending into fetishistic savagery. The Catholic priest. On November 2nd, All Souls Day, one of the holiest of Catholic celebrations, Mullin stumbled into a church in Los Gatos, just over the hills from Santa Cruz. He had been drinking, and decided to go to St. Mary's Catholic Church to give me strength to never attempt to kill again. Within moments he was brutally stabbing a priest to death in his confessional booth with his hunting knife. He later claimed he carried the knife into the church to protect himself. Mullin thought the church was empty, but when he heard Father Henry Tomei in one of the booths, he decided, well, if you, the priest, are in here, I guess I should kill you. He tried to force the confessional door open. Tomei, hearing the commotion, opened the door to see what was going on. Mullin attacked Tomei with a hunting knife, stabbing him in the heart as he struggled, trapped in the confines of his narrow confessional. A parishioner walked in and, seeing the struggle, screamed and ran out. She got a glimpse of a young man dressed in black, struggling with the priest. It must have been a blur of black and blood. The community was outraged by the senseless murder of 65-year-old Tomei, a hero in the French resistance movement World War II. Some worried that it was the work of a satanic cult. Civic leaders attended his funeral, and so did the police, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man dressed in black. But Mullin did not return. He did, however, leave fingerprints at the crime scene. That Mullin's third victim would be a Catholic priest fits with his fleeting malice toward organized religion. Religion was fine with Mullin, as long as it was his own bizarre concoction. In 1970 he disrupted a Sunday morning service in a Catholic church, telling the startled congregation that what you are doing is wrong. Mullin then offered his own philosophy as an alternative, but was physically tossed out before he could harvest any converts. He tried to persuade his fellow mental patients at a psychiatric ward in San Luis Obispo to help him change the spiritual nature of the world. He got into yelling matches with God, terrifying his roommate in San Francisco. Yet Mullin's rebellion against religion often flipped into a full embrace of Catholicism. He carried a Bible around, and talked about becoming a priest. His mother was shocked by his murder of a Catholic priest. He'd been a deeply religious child, you know, altar boy in the Catholic religion, she said. Sanctified killing. By killing Father Tomei, Mullin seems to have struck close to the source of his anger, his own stern, Roman Catholic father. Father Tomei's murder agitated him more than any of his victims, according to psychiatrist Donald Lund. In his typical pattern of kill and make up, Mullin now wanted to appease his father, and tried to follow in his footsteps by joining the armed forces. The military seemed like the ideal solution. Mullin could indulge his violent urges with the blessings of the state. In November, he applied to join the Coast Guard. When he was denied in December after failing the psychological exam, he lapsed into his paranoia that it was all a conspiracy against him. The hippies and war resistors were to blame. They brainwashed him by giving him drugs and talked him into being a conscientious objector. Now the voices were back, urging a sacrifice. And this time he was going after the people who ruined his life. The peace advocates and flower children had played tricks on my mind, and I had to wreak vengeance, he told Dr. Lund. He targeted a longtime friend and fellow drug user, John Hooper, and brought a hunting knife to his house. But there were 9 other people there. Mullin realized it was time to upgrade his killing method, and bought a gun. At the gun shop he gave his occupation as a sketch artist, lying about his stints in the psychiatric wards. But for some reason, Mullin decided to hold off on killing the flower children. Instead, he applied to the Marine Corps. The recruiting sergeant was reluctant, but after Mullin's badgering he recommended him for service. He wrote in his official report, "Herbert William Mullin is an intelligent and highly motivated young man, with an ultra-zealous eagerness to enlist in the USMC because of Herb's earnest desire to improve his lot and climb above his peers. As it were, I submit that Herbert William Mullin can, and most likely will, be a benefit to whatever unit he is assigned and a credit to his corps." Mullin was tremendously excited that his application had been accepted. He now had a purposeful mission. On January 15, 1973, Mullin passed both the physical and psychiatric exams for the Marines, but when he stubbornly refused to sign a document acknowledging his arrest record, he was dismissed. He was devastated, bitterly denouncing his parents for their failures in raising him. But they had enough of Herb's rantings, and told him it was time to move out. On January 19, Mullin found a shabby apartment near the beach, where he sat alone, his resentments festering, and the kill voices filling his brain. He decided to kill the most important peace advocate, Jim Gennara, his high school buddy. The hippie massacre. This thing has a pattern to it. It's not a case of some crazy man running around shooting people. Santa Cruz Police Captain Overton, trying to quell public concern, after the Gennara/Francis murders in Mullin's distorted logic, Jim Gennara represented everything that messed up his life. Gennara gave him the drugs that caused his brain to malfunction. Gennara told him about the peace movement which made all of society shun him, and he even tricked him out of buying land. Mullin, alone and fuming in his disappointments, decided that Gennara had duped him. On January 25, 1973, Mullin drove to a shanty area hidden away on Muddy Road near the Mystery Spot, a popular Santa Cruz tourist trap in the mountains. Soaked by the rain, he waited for Kathy Francis to come to the door of the wooden shack she shared with her husband Bob, who was in Berkeley, closing a drug deal, and her 2 children, 9-year-old David and 4-year-old Damon. When Mullin asked to see Jim, Kathy told him that Jim and his wife Joan moved to Western Avenue in town. Mullin thanked her and left. But he would be back. When Gennaro let the casual acquaintance into his home, Mullin cried, "You're claptrapping me," and shot Jim as he tried to escape. Wounded, he dragged himself upstairs, where his wife was taking a bath. Mullin followed him and shot them both in the head. With his hunting knife, he stabbed both of the Gianniras to the point of overkill. The Gianniras would be discovered later that day by Joan's mother, who was babysitting their infant girl, The decision to go back to Mystery Spot Road and kill Kathy Francis and her two boys was the most logical of Mullin's otherwise unfathomable killings. Francis was a potential witness, and he was terrified of jail. He drove back to the Francis home, parked his station wagon down the road so it wouldn't get stuck in the mud, shoved the cabin door open, and opened fire. He shot Kathy in the chest and head, and killed the two boys as they played Chinese checkers on their bunk bed. In his rage he stabbed all three, even though they were apparently dead. The massacre looked like a drug burn to the local authorities. Both Bob Francis and Jim Gennaro were known marijuana dealers. After Bob Francis was found and cleared as a suspect, the police asked him come up with any suspects. Bob produced a long list of drug dealers, rivals, and other misfits, but Herb Mullin was not on the list. In fact, the last that Jim Gennaro had seen of Mullin was in the summer of 1971, when Mullin did 10 hits of acid during a visit. A few months later Mullin sent Gennaro a weird letter, asking him who he was going to vote for in the upcoming November elections. Bob Francis and Jim Gennaro laughed at it, and didn't give Mullin much thought after that. Murderville. Santa Cruz County was petrified. In 1970 John Linley Frazier terrorized the town with his cold-blooded execution of the Oda family and secretary. A note under the windshield wiper of the Oda's Rolls-Royce was frightfully Manson-esque. Today World War III will begin as brought to you by the people of the free universe, and warned that anyone abusing the environment for the sake of materialism will die. Gun sales rose sharply, especially among homeowners, who took the threat seriously. Some thought it was a bloodthirsty ecological cult, but Frazier, who was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, had acted alone. He did have some competition, however. Female hitchhikers began vanishing in April 1972. Some had been found decapitated. On February 5, 1973, Alice Lou and Rosalind Thorpe disappeared. The next day, a 79-year-old widow was found raped and strangled to death in her bathtub. Before the month was over, another 6 victims would be discovered. And many hitchhikers were being raped. Was this the work of one fiend? A few days after the Lou and Thorpe disappearance, Guilfoyle's skeleton was discovered on February 11. Earlier, Cynthia Shaw's body parts had been found strewn along the coast, and Mary Ann Pest's head was discovered in the Loma Prieta Mountains. Yet college women continued to hitchhike, insisting it was a lifestyle. The teenage campers. In Henry Cowell State Park, the Card brothers built a temporary campsite out of plastic sheets and spare wood, far from the ranger's route. They chose a spot called the Garden of Eden, and on February 10, the 4 teenagers who lived in it were about to be permanently expelled. The wrath of the camp rangers would have been nothing compared to the wrath of Herb Mullin, self-styled avenging angel. Mullin discovered the illegal campsite when he wandering around in the woods. The 4 boys, Brian Scott Card, David O'Liker, Rover Spector, and Mark Dreibelbus, invited him in, but Mullin was hostile. He demanded that the boys pack up and leave, because they were defacing government property. Mullin was angry that he had been hassled by a ranger for doing the same thing a while earlier, and didn't think it was fair that these teenagers should get away with it. The boys looked at the scowling Mullin, comic in his intent to enforce the law, and laughed at him. As they argued, Mullin said, "I decided to kill them, and asked them telepathically if I could, and they all answered yes." They were all in a sitting position, and it was all over in a few seconds. Later, Mullin would say that they asked for it. He meant it literally, but prosecutors took it as proof of his hatred for renegade campers, hippies, flower children, and other counterculture deviants. Had he ever really asked for the victims' permission, it's likely he would not have had many takers. The scene of carnage in the woods, discovered a week later by the brother of one of the victims, revealed a desperate struggle that lasted more than a humane few seconds. One of the teenagers was shot trying to claw his way through the plastic walls. They were trapped, and Mullin viciously shot them one by one. When Mullin was finished, he took their rifle and $20. The final victim. On February 12th, trapshooters found Mary Guilfoyle's remains. Again, police warned against the danger of hitchhiking, and implored young women to stay out of the cars of strangers. It's like Russian roulette, they said. But this warning carried little weight with the victim Mullin would hit tomorrow. Who would have known that puttering in your front yard at 8 in the morning could be deadly? On February 13th, Mullin planned to bring some firewood to his parents' home. But a telepathic message came from his father: "Don't deliver a stick of wood until you kill somebody." The voice suggested Uncle Enos, but when Herb resisted, the voice wasn't as particular. Just kill somebody, anybody. Mullin drove by Fred Porras as he worked in his driveway. It was a still, foggy morning. He shot the retired prize fighter once in the heart, and he died instantly. Mullin sat quietly in his car for a moment, holding the rifle he took from the campsite a few days ago. Then he backed up, and drove away slowly. If, for Mullin, the young campers represented his own flower child phase that he now wanted to wipe away, his 13th victim, Porras, oddly enough, represented someone who Mullin wanted to be. "He was someone I respected," Mullin said, although he didn't know him. He had no explanation for why he shot Porras. The prosecution would later argue that it was a "come catch me" crime, that Mullin was ready to call it quits. This time there was a witness. A neighbor heard the shot, and peering out her window, caught a glimpse at the killer's vehicle. Mullin was headed toward Felton, his Chevy station wagon filled with firewood for his parents, with the rifle in the front seat, covered by a paper bag. A policeman pulled him over without backup, and arrested him. Mullin didn't resist. But he wouldn't speak either. Arrest. At the police station, Mullin sulked and refused to talk, even routine questions such as, "Do you have an attorney?" or "Would you like to make a phone call?" met with Mullin's loud reply of, "Silence." He continued to chant the word, "silence," until everyone had had enough. Frustrated investigators ordered him to his cell. As they took him away, Mullin announced, "You people were responsible for the 3 million killed in World War II." The doctor at the police station who examined Mullin was surprised by the garish tattoos on his belly: "Legalize acid" and "Legalize marijuana." Other tattoos read, "Birth, Mahashamati," and Kriya Yoga. Strange tattoos for someone who appeared so clean-cut and hated hippies with a passion. At his sparse apartment, where Mullin had lived for the last 3 weeks, police found a Bible, the paperback book Einstein, The Life and Times, an address book with Gennaro listed, and newspaper articles about the recent murders. The revolver had been discovered in his station wagon, and ballistic tests were soon underway. They also found the following note: "Let it be known to the nations of Earth and the people that inhabit it, this document carries more power than any other written before. Such a tragedy as what has happened should not have happened, and because of this action which I take of my own free will, I am making it possible to occur again. For while I can be here, I must guide and protect my dynasty." Like the thick morning fog, speculation rolled through the Santa Cruz Valley. Was this diminutive young man the same guy who was beheading hitchhikers? The day following his arrest, officials announced that ballistics proved that Mullin had also killed the Francis family and the Gianniras. Those who knew the 25-year-old Mullin remembered him as bright, deeply religious, but somewhat uptight. But he had fallen into heavy drug use, and blew his mind. Mullin was charged with 6 counts of murder. The count rose to 10 after the bodies of the campers were discovered 2 days later on February 17th. Bodies seemed to be turning up on a daily basis. But now that they had a suspect in custody, Santa Cruz authorities looked at the recent unsolved murders, hoping to tie them to Mullin. Investigators compared Mary Guilfoyle's skeleton with the remains of other women found. Los Gatos authorities submitted the fingerprints found at the church where Father Tomé was stabbed to death. Reporters clamored to know if it was the same killer. District Attorney Peter Chang, with some resignation, said, "We must be the murder capital of the world right now." When asked why the murder rate in Santa Cruz was so high, Chang said, "First, we've had a homicidal maniac whom we know has killed 10 people." After a reporter asked about the additional 5 bodies of female hitchhikers, Chang grimly responded, "We then have another homicidal maniac." As much as they would have liked to tie all of the murders to Herb Mullin, there was no evidence that linked him to the murdered co-eds. The skillfulness of the decapitations of 2 women found on February 15th, the same day as Mullin's arraignment, convinced investigators that another killer was working the area. Mullin's murders were not as anatomically precise or obsessive. Although Mary Guilfoyle was similar to the other killer's victim profile, she was not decapitated or dismembered. For now, there were no links between Guilfoyle and the other unidentified serial killer currently prowling the area. Mullin was charged with 10 counts of murder. He had not yet been charged with killing Lawrence White, Father Henry Tomé, or Mary Guilfoyle, his first 3 victims. At his hearing on March 1st, Mullin carried in a 2-volume legal book, and startled the court by trying to plead guilty. But the judge refused to accept a guilty plea in a case of such magnitude. "I won't accept that," Mullin replied. "You gave me a choice and I chose." When his lawyer tried to intervene, Mullin said, in his clipped manner of speech, "I refuse counsel." He later insisted again on representing himself. When the judge refused, Mullin said, pointing to his lawyer, "James Jackson, I don't care to be represented by a long hair." The judge tried to assure Mullin of Jackson's competency, despite the fact that his bushy hair was a little over the collar. James Jackson, who had been Frazier's defender, would later represent Edmund Kemper. "In that case, I plead guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder." Back to square one. Mullin was furious that he couldn't represent himself. The judge was quickly losing patience with Mullin, and the trial hadn't even started. He seriously doubted Mullin's competence to stand trial. D.A. Chang said, "You can't just hand a guy a complaint and let him plead guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. If we let him plead guilty, we would be thrown out on our ear by the Supreme Court." Psychiatrists were called in to examine Mullin. It was unanimous, Herbert William Mullin was a paranoid schizophrenic. Typically, schizophrenics, Greek for split, and mind, suffer from auditory hallucinations, hearing voices, fragmented thinking, and delusional belief systems of self-importance, including being psychic. Despite rational evidence proving otherwise, a schizophrenic will be convinced that there is a grand conspiracy against them, so huge it can span from the FBI to intergalactic UFOs. Mullin's extensive hospital records, along with his one-on-one examinations with the doctors, convinced everyone that he was seriously mentally ill. Everyone agreed that Mullin killed at least 10 people. The trial would determine whether he was legally insane when he did it. Legally speaking, insanity is determined by the McNaughton standard, which says that if a defendant understood the difference between right and wrong, then the defendant was guilty. If a defendant makes an attempt to conceal the crime, This can be taken as evidence that the defendant knew it was wrong. If Mullin was found legally insane, then he would be considered not guilty. Therefore, any actions Mullin took to hide what he did would be closely examined. Also at issue was the notion of diminished capacity. If Mullin did not understand the meaning of his actions, he could not be found guilty of first-degree murder. His defense knew that diminished capacity was crucial to prove, and constructed their case on Mullin's weird doctrines of dementia. Mullin sat in his jail cell, ceaselessly scribbled out his philosophies, convinced he could explain the grand design behind his killing. He wrote on Jonah, Einstein, and earthquakes. These delusional belief systems would support his case, but not for the reasons in which he hoped. These bizarre notes would provide important evidence for the defense in attempting to prove his insanity. The 6-man, 6-women jury deliberated for over 14 hours, finding Mullin sane and guilty. The verdict was delivered on August 19, 1973. Mullin premeditated the deaths of Jim Gennara and Kathy Francis, thereby making 2 counts of first-degree murder. The rest were considered impulse by the jury, therefore second-degree murder. "It's as insane as Mullin is," said his defense attorney Jackson. "They were afraid because he might get out and kill somebody, which is not an illogical consideration. They didn't want his 14th victim to be one of them." The prosecution was disappointed with only 2 counts of first-degree murder. Mullin only shrugged when he heard his verdict. Mullin was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2025.